I'm not hearing anything.
Muted.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our third webinar of the first round of briefing sessions on preparations of SBSTTA 24. I hope you can hear me well. I please ask you to maintain your microphones mute to avoid background noise. I wish all of you and your people, your families are good, are healthy, facing this particular and difficult situation of COVID-19. We are starting our webinar. Let me tell you that dear participants for the many regions and zones, even this third webinar is focused mainly on the Americas time zone. We usually have participants from other areas as well. So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. As I said, this first round of webinars is dedicated to agenda item 3 of SBSTTA 24, which is on post-2020 global biodiversity framework. As you know, SBSTTA 24 has a busy agenda, including this particular item on post-2020 global biodiversity framework, which attracts a lot of attention and high interest to consider draft documents as early as possible to be ready for negotiations. In this regard, SBSTTA Bureau, with the Secretariat and co-chairs, decide to use an opportunity of SBSTTA 24 meeting being postponed due COVID-19 to use this time to develop higher quality documents and allow parties and stakeholders to better prepare for discussions at SBSTTA 24 meeting. This will hopefully allow for better and more specific advice to the third meeting of the open-ended working group, where we have both co-chairs with us in this meeting, Basil and Francis. The draft documents for peer review were posted on the last Thursday and Friday. The Secretariat issued notifications inviting the peer review process for these documents. Let me tell you that previously there were other documents, a couple of documents for peer review that was a notification and the due date was last March. So I invite you to close your microphones, please.
This conference will now be recorded.
Yes, as you heard, this conference is being recorded and will be posted one of the webinars in the website of SBSTTA 24. I'd like to give thanks to co-chairs, Basil and Francis, for the hard work in preparing elements for SBSTTA documents and working very closely with SBSTTA chair to design these information webinars. I want to express my appreciation to the Secretariat, in particular to Sasha and team, for preparing documents for the peer review and for the organization of the meetings. A lot of work. You cannot imagine how many times we've been meeting both with co-chairs and with Sasha and team to prepare this series of webinars and documents. How we want to organize our meeting today. Among SBSTTA chair, the open-ended working group co-chairs, and the Secretariat, we will cover the following topics. So please, I invite you to close some microphones to avoid back noise, please. Can I see next slide, please? Thank you. After session 1, we will have the first questions and answers session for 15 minutes. Questions will be accepted through the chat first, and then we will invite those who are using only the phone and are not able to write to use the chat. So I invite you to write your questions through the chat. After session 2A, we will have the second questions and answers for 15 minutes, followed by a 5-minute break, when you may fill up your cup, like me, and visit the washroom if you wish so. Session 2B is divided in 2 parts. First, the monitoring framework, and second, the information documents. After monitoring framework, we will have a third opportunity for questions and answers. And then the last session will be followed by the fourth and the last questions and answers slot. This and the following sessions will be recorded, as I said before, and one of them will be available on Substat 24. We just had in our last night, our time, the one for Asia time zones, Asia and Pacific. So this is the third time. It's quite interesting, but very different questions from the different time zones regarding the preparations. It's been very useful. I hope this one will be so fruitful. With this, I am happy to give the floor to co-chairs of the open-ended working group to provide you with a general update on post-2020 process. So Basil and Francis, you have the floor, and good morning.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Glad to meet you again. We as co-chairs really appreciate this consultation which is going on. So we will be sharing the slides amongst ourselves, the co-chairs and the chair of Substat. So if we could please go to the next slide for us to give this update on the process. As most of you are aware, we really had a very good plan. We had a very good timetable, which we had drawn beginning of 2019. We knew when we could do what. We had even set the date for COP, for Substat, for SBI. Everything was in place. But little did we know about what was ahead of us. So COVID has definitely brought uncertainty, which in many ways now has affected that planning which we originally had. And to make matters even more a bit complicated is the fact that this pandemic is becoming very unpredictable. You see countries opening up, again locking, going back to lockdown, and trying to open up. So it is really a trying time. So that has meant also in many ways that we cannot hold face-to-face meetings the way we had planned. And that remains a challenge, of course. It does remain a challenge. But despite that, I think technology has made it possible for us to continue making progress as we wait for the situation to normalize. So what has COVID brought for us is that we need now to keep adapting, readapting, and perhaps even re-readapting as time goes by, and make use, as I said earlier, of what technology can enable us to do as we wait for the situation to become better. If we could please go to the next slide, but of course we remain very flexible and we continue to make progress. Next slide. You've heard what Substat Chair has just said, that even if this COVID situation is there, for us immediately after the meeting of the second meeting of the open-ended working group, we didn't sit back. We've been working so hard using what technology could allow us to do. So with regard to the post-2020 process, if someone could please unmute. With regard to the post-2020 process and what we expect of Substat, just to say up front that we should keep in mind that when it comes to negotiating the text of the Global Biodiversity Framework, that is the GBF, that of course, as most of you may already be knowing or know, will be done by the open-ended working group. So we do not expect negotiations to happen at Substat 24th, but what we're expecting, and as was the outcome of the second meeting of the working group from Rome, is that we expect Substat to really focus on technical and scientific review and analysis of the components of the targets and goals as you see them in the document uploaded, advise on the attributes of goals and targets, on the indicators. This has been said severally. Without indicators, it can be very difficult to track progress, but also that we need advice on the numerical values. That is on regarding the quantitative targets. We need Substat to give us advice there on the numerical values. And then there has been, of course, the talk and the need for us to have baseline data. So again, you will see attempt has been made in that direction. So we expect SBSTTA to look at that. But also there is a document on the linkages to SDGs, how we have linked the GBF to the SDGs, our own goals to the SDG goals, our own targets to the SDG targets, our own indicators as well as the indicators of the SDGs. So you'll find them there in the documents you're going to see. But of course, there are several other agenda items that are relevant to the post-2020 that will be considered during SBSTTA, and that include the one on health. As most of you know, health is now becoming one of those, one of the most important items as well, as far as biodiversity is concerned. And given this current pandemic, maybe that is also an advantage. We should try to take to our advantage and see how we can make the case for biodiversity in ensuring a better health for us on this planet. So let's go to the next slide. Yes, and this concerns SBI 3, just like SBSTTA 24th. Also, SBI has a role to play, SBI 3. And for them, the mandate is clearly given there that we expect that SBI 3 will provide elements to the development of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. In particular, looking at those elements that support those areas of implementation and review, including, of course, mechanisms as well as enabling conditions, responsibility, transparency, and outreach, as well as awareness. So that is broadly the mandate that was given to SBI 3 at the second meeting of the open-ended working group. So they will be looking at, in particular, those means that can support us in the implementation and in review, as well as enabling conditions, issues on responsibility and transparency, awareness and outreach. But also we know that there is a specific agenda item 5 that is on post-2020 global biodiversity target. So that one is specifically designated or earmarked for post-2020. And post-2020, of course, as most of you know, is a broad discussion that will include even issues on biosafety, as well as on ABS, access and benefit sharing. But when you look at the agenda item for SBI 3, there are several that are actually relevant to the post-2020. And it links up to the other broad mandate, which I've said up there just given. So those are the following: resource mobilization and financial mechanism, capacity building, technical and scientific cooperation, technology transfer, knowledge management, and communication. You see that it still reflects back to the other broader mandate given by the open-ended working group at the second meeting. Then the other one is to do with the cooperation, mechanism for reporting, assessment and review, and mainstreaming of biodiversity. So when you look at those agenda items, it talks to the broader mandate that came from the second meeting of the open-ended working group. So that is what we expect to come out of SBSTTA 3, SBI 3, that will also feed into the development of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. So these two bodies, as the COP recommended, are really playing a very critical role in the process of developing the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. So let's go to the next slide. When you look at the process now, what do we expect to happen between now? There are some other processes that, of course, are still remaining that is going to take place. We know that there are some thematic consultations, as well as the last meeting of the open-ended working group. We shall be looking at some potential timelines on this. And then, as I said earlier, SBI 3 will meet and make recommendations for consideration by the third meeting of the open-ended working group. And then we will, of course, update the framework itself, basing on the outcome the second meeting of the working group. And also you will see effort when that document is done that you will include E to H. So those are broadly what we are going to do as the remaining processes. So once we've done that, then we expect that the GBF will reflect those elements, but also other details will be presented in the annex. And then that should then head to COP15, and we see how we move on from there to operationalize the different elements. If we could please go to the next slide. So you've just heard from the co-chair, the subset chair, about some progress being made, about the peer review. So what did we do immediately? We came back from Rome. We worked very hard to really update the goals. So you will see there are tables of goals with the milestone, 2030 milestones, 2030 targets, the monitoring elements, the indicators, the baseline. But as I also said earlier on, we also expect some advice on the numerical values for the quantitative targets. So you'll see a document also having the baseline data, when that data could probably be assumed to start or is expected to have started, and then the annotations, which explain some of the concepts we have used, and then the SDG linkages. So that is the document that right now, or those are the documents that is now uploaded for peer review, and we encourage you to have time to review them and get back to us. Then after that, we expect, of course, to continue working and then come up with a document that will now be submitted to SBSTTA, awaiting the meeting of SBSTTA, which we expect. The dates that we've seen is perhaps November, but it is still also subject to a lot of reviews to see what will take place. So you will have that revised SBSTTA documents, the annotations, the SDG linkages, and then advice on those numerical targets that I talked about. But we also shall have another detailed document that we'll be looking at the draft goals and targets and milestones, and then the E to H. So those are the documents that you are going to see that will come up for the meeting of SBSTTA at this 24th meeting. Now, we also expect to continue with some other thematic consultation. The one on sustainable use, most likely now, is going to be on online, given the situation we are in. We also have the one on synergies, the Bantu. This is also going to happen. And then you have one on access and benefit sharing. But just to let you know that the documents that is going to be going up for SBSTTA, we expect it to go up at least 6 weeks before that meeting takes place, whenever parties or stakeholders to review them. But also, we are going to have a webinar on GBO5. We expect to do one on review mechanisms, resource mobilization, and then from that should help us to complete the draft that I was talking about. So there are still lots of webinars coming up. And after the SBSTTA meeting, then, and of course, when we have also got some out from the DSI, we should be able to prepare draft 1.0. That draft 1.0 then is the one that goes to the third meeting of the open-ended working group. The date for this, again, is still being discussed, but definitely not this year, sometime next year. And we also expect 6 weeks to have the documents ready before then, so that parties can have a look at that. And then after that, we should prepare the final draft and head with it to COP15. The date, as you have seen, has been communicated for COP15, but that is also going to be under review, subject to the prevailing situation. So briefly, that is the timelines for where we are with the different work we are doing, and in terms of setting possible timelines for holding some of this meeting. Of course, we all want to see a face-to-face meeting, and we hope that will happen. Let's go to the next slide. So some of this, I think, I already explained in my previous slide about the next steps. As I already told you, the band 2, which is on synergies with other MES and other instruments, sustainable use, thematic consultation, the one on access and benefit sharing, but also DSI process. We expect that to take place to inform us in the development of the post-2020, and then hold those meetings, SBSTTA 24th and the third meeting of SBI. And after that, we then head to our very last meeting for the open-ended working group, and then of course have COP15 with its high-level segment. But there will also be other important meetings taking place, of course, as we carry on ours here there. That is one, the UN high-level political forum expected to take place this month. Then the IMF and World Bank meetings. These have been very, very supportive of the process. And I think they're very much interested to continue participating in the post-2020. Then the UN Biodiversity Summit for Heads of States, September 2020. Now, again here, the latest we have is that although it was expected perhaps for heads of states to meet physically, but now, given the current situation we are in, I think it will now take place online. So that changes a little bit how these meetings will happen and maybe how decisions will be reached there. But that is what we are experiencing now. Then IUCN World Conservation Congress, that one is going to take place in January, early January next year. And then, of course, we shall have G7 and G20. So those are the other important processes that we see are going to be very important for the post-2020. We need to find ourselves relevant to those processes because it is where you make very important inroads, including political inroads for biodiversity. By the way, I think climate change was able to make most of these strides in such meetings and always kept on bringing on the message of climate change. And so most of heads of states and other key stakeholders out there had to know the impact of climate change. I think this time around, we shouldn't be left behind. We have to be on board early and also take advantage to make the case for biodiversity, which, by the way, is one of the things that everybody on this planet, as long as you're on this planet, you depend on it. It is not even a question whether or not you depend on biodiversity. So let's take advantage of these processes. Next slide. So the next slide is basically about the document to be issued ahead of the meeting of the open-ended working group. That is the third meeting. So as I said earlier, we are going to have the final draft. Sorry, the draft 1.0 of the GBF. So that draft 1.0 is going to make consideration on a number of things. One is that we shall reflect on the outcomes of the meetings of the open-ended working group, both the first and the second meetings. We shall also reflect on the meeting of the working group on Article 8J, the outcomes of SBSTTA 23, as well as the outcome of SBSTTA 24 and SBI 3. Then written submissions up to 24th February this year, we shall be taking on board that, but also reflect on the outcomes from the thematic consultations and other post-2020 meetings. So there have been a number of meetings that have taken place. And as co-chair, I think that has helped us a lot to keep really looking at the draft we have, seeing how best we take on board all the good recommendations that are coming up from this meeting. So that is how draft 1.0 of the post-2020 is going to be prepared. And I have to tell you that even as we continue working at co-chairs and the secretariat and together with the SBSTTA chair and the SBI chair, we always depend a lot on the outcomes of the open-ended working group, because that is where we derive the mandate from. Next slide. So I think I'll leave it at that and hand back to SBSTTA chair.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair Francis Sowell, on your presentation. As you can see, colleagues, this is the panorama on how what's the plan, including the contribution from SBSTTA, the contribution from SBI, the series of meetings around with that timeline, including various consultations like on synergies, ABS, DSI, on sustainable use, and meetings in the UN, and also multilateral environmental agreements, all of them contributing to get the draft one that will be the basis for negotiations in the third meeting of the open-ended working group. Meanwhile, we have a clear mandate in substance, and I will explain later what is exactly the process on how documents for SBSTA are prepared, but we need to focus and to address the mandate we have, and our contribution as a scientific body is mainly from an analysis from the scientific and technical perspective. We have now 15 minutes for questions and answers, and we have already a number of questions in the chat. But before reading them, I'd like to welcome our colleague Charlotta, the chair of SBI, which is also in attending this meeting, Elizabeth Mrema, the executive secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity, which, as you know, was recently appointed as the executive secretary. So I welcome her and congratulate for her appointment. And also I know Ana Maria Hernandez, the chair of IPBES, is also connect and attending our meeting. Also, as you saw in the chat, there is also a live streaming from Biodiversity Live. The link is been posted a couple of times. I hope we can put it another one. Yeah, I'm doing it. There, well, I did it for someone in particular to have more coverage of this webinar. Okay, now going to questions. Jorge Murillo, will a series of webinars similar to this be held in the role of the third session of SBI and the post-2020 process? I know there are in conversations with the chair of SBI, probably they will explain in further detail later. As explained, co-chairs, the SBI agenda does not have to be a specific item on post-2020 process as the case of SBSTA. However, issues are crucial to the process that will be discussed, such as resource mobilizations, monitoring mechanisms, capacity building, and mainstreaming. It will be a specific contribution from SBI to the process, and I will allow co-chairs to respond. We believe that's pertinent to have a space on SBI chair which parties can understand expectations of the meeting and explore alternatives. Yes, it will be a space. Sue Lieberman, can you share when webinars mentioned will take place, particularly on sustainable use and burn, or when the notification will be issued? Okay, we saw the timetable, and Secretariat and co-chairs can also explain the question of Lieberman. Frederick Wolf, can you please clarify the status of the goals and targets in the first documents we review post-2020 monitoring? And also, Evelyn, I agree with Jorge, putting an SBI agendas issue post-2020 will be very much appreciated. Yes, let me clarify that this is for preparation of SBSTA 24, but it will be a space for SBI. Friedrich Wolf, why are all these submissions until February 4, taking into account for GBIF draft 1.0, while SBSTA, which is half a year later, is taken into account? And Noah, the world has drastically changed since February. Is there an option to another written submission round prior to the third meeting of open-ended working group and draft 1.0 publication? For example, linking the green recovery from COVID-19. And Luciana, I invite you also to rename in your names, also to include your country or institution that can facilitate also identification of questions. I know the slide 1C, SBSTA will discuss 2050 goals. Could you kindly give an explanation? In the second meeting of the open-ended recommendation, nothing was agreed on this. So with this package of questions, I pass I give the floor to co-chairs to respond, and also secretariat. So co-chairs, you have the floor.
Great, thank you. And Francis, if that's okay, I'll start and pass it on to you. Ezekiel did a good job in answering a number of questions, so I may go fast on some. In terms of the question from Jorge about similar type of webinar around the SBI3 post-2020 item, we're in discussion with the SBI chair and the secretariat to arrange that. The process will be a little bit different, but I think you're going to get the same kind of opportunity to input. So I would not worry about that. There was a number of questions on the various dates, etc. So on specific events, like Sue Lieberman asked about the sustainable use thematic consultation, we're hoping that the concept note and the notification will be published very, very soon in a matter of days. So watch for that. And then the second thing is, Francis and I will be exploring with the Secretariat is how we can update that timeline. I went to it on the CVD website, and I'm not sure it was available last time I checked. So we'll make sure that there is a timeline. I keep one for myself in my own project Gantt chart, and we're trying to spread things around so you don't have all the consultation in 1 week. Question from Friedrich about the status of the goals and targets that is provided on the document for SBSTA. And I'm answering as well to a question from Luciana. You've asked us to provide the SBSTA and ASBI with an updated version of the goals and targets that reflect the discussion that took place in Rome. So the leftward column of the table in the document, and we'll go through that in a few slides, are presenting that rewrite. It is not for negotiation at SBSTA. It is presented as a context to help with the discussion on the performance indicators, etc. There was a question also from Friedrich about why are we not considering written submission provided after February 24th. It's important to understand that we're past the initial phase of drafting draft 0, and we're now into the formal negotiation. And you will see further down in the slides that we have a very clear mandate from the open-ended working group that tell us what kind of input we should be reflecting, and there is limitation on that. However, the written channel is still open, and I encourage you to post documented views on that channel. And I'm pretty sure that parties, when they are preparing their position and preparing for open-ended working group 3, will be looking at that, and that may be a good way to look at that. Finally, has the situation changed, and whether there would be an opportunity to link to the green recovery. I think there is a lot of efforts in terms of making the right link, but it's also important to understand the timeline. Green recovery decisions are made by government now and over the next few days. Our process for creating a global biodiversity framework will be extending through part of next year, and we'll be, we're looking at setting the stage and setting the table, not only for the next 10 years, but also all the way to 2050, our vision. So those are two different time scales and two important objectives, but that, in my view, should be addressed through different process. So, Francis, do you want to add anything to my element of answers? Thank you.
Thank you, Co-Chair. I think just to add a little bit to what you've said, I'm looking at the comment from Jorge here about SBI and post-2020. I think we have actually under SBI 3, there is agenda item 5 that is specifically on the post-2020. So So there is an item that specifically addresses post-2020 global biodiversity framework. And then, of course, the resource mobilization, those which are leads capacity building, technical review, and so forth, those will come up with a recommendation. And those that will touch the post-2020 process will definitely go into that main agenda item, that is agenda item 5. I think that is how we expect it to happen. But again, we shall be seeing how we can continue to, perhaps even see how to bring out the work we are doing with SBI chair, just like we are doing the one for the SAPSA. And then regarding the goals and targets, the updated ones, I just want to emphasize what you have said, Co-Chair. I think there could, of course, be temptation to try to negotiate those updated goals and targets. But as we have pointed it out, I think let stakeholders leave that process of negotiation to happen at the meeting of the open-ended working group. But rather, let's focus on the scientific elements of SAPSA, as that is its mandate on this process. So there will be that temptation, but we request that we really focus on the scientific analysis of the goals, of the baselines of those other elements that we listed earlier. So we leave the text to be negotiated at another stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair. Secretariat, Sasha, do you want to add something?
Thank you, Sekio. I think that most questions were answered, and definitely we will further update timeline on the post-2020 website. So you will see all events, all upcoming events. And also please follow also notifications, as all of them will be introduced through notifications. And in terms of sustainable use, Vasil already mentioned that it will be posted shortly, with the consultation process starting at the end of this month. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I will continue reading some of the questions here. There is an answer from UNEP about burn 2 workshops scenarios, I guess. And be considered, but webinar information sessions will be held in August, at the end of August. There is a question from Evelyn Vera from Mexico. Can you please share more information on the digital sequence information event mentioned in the timeline? Is it going to be a thematic consultation? There is another question from S. Faizi. Co-chairs and substitute chair have defined what is the overall purpose of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework when we have a well-negotiated CBD text, which gives even importance to all its articles, and these are well balanced on different axes. I have been a negotiator for the CBD text in CBD INC, and get a feel that this is like a renegotiation of CBD by carefully overlooking some of the provisions that were included at the instance of developing countries, as happened in the first strategic plan too. CBD articles 15.7, 16.3, 16.5, 12b, 15.6. This is a concern also shared by some other negotiators at the original text of CBD. Basil, this is misplaced expert team actually met in March. Apologies. Will be correct for the webinar. Thanks, Basil. I also received another request from the chat that they would like to have copies of presentations available. Answer from SBI chair. There will be information webinars also on SBI agenda items. More information will come later. Thank you very much, Madam Chair of SBI. And Frederick Wolf, are there already precise dates for thematic workshops, webinar on sustainable use on synergies and ABS? So I give the floor back again to co-chairs to respond, and also Secretariat if they wish so. Please.
Thank you. I think it's a number of very useful answers there and questions. Regarding the question of the what is we're trying to do, I think we've presented several times in open-ended working group 1 and then in 2 the proposed theory of change. We received a mandate from the COP and the open-ended working group to draft a document. And what we're trying to do with this new framework, it's not to renegotiate the convention. The convention is a base from which we're working. What we're trying to do here is to have a balanced framework, global biodiversity frameworks that bring up some of the second and the third objective of the convention at the same level as the first one. So my feeling was that parties were supportive of that objective. They were supportive of the scope of the convention, the scope of the change, and the type of framework we're presenting. So I'm looking forward to the discussion at the third meeting of the open-ended working group. But let's keep in mind, as Ezekiel has said earlier, the objective of this briefing is twofold. First, give you an overview of the process, but second, and we will get into that in the next few sessions, is to prepare you and help you with this first phase of peer review process on the SBSTTA document. And SBSTTA has a very important role in providing scientific advice. So that's important to make the distinction between the scientific advice that SBSTTA brings and the negotiation role of the open-ended working group. Francis, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think definitely we did, in addition to what you just said, during the consultation process, we heard very strongly from stakeholders that this time round, when we are looking at this framework, we should reflect the 3 objectives of the convention in the post-2020. So we are trying as co-chairs with support from SBSTTA chair, secretariat, SBI chair, to really make sure that we reflect the 3 objectives of the convention in a balanced manner, as been said severally. So that is how this framework, we are trying to really work on it. As the co-chair said, we are not really renegotiating the convention itself, but trying to see how it could reflect those 3 objectives. We've heard that perhaps sustainable use was never given much attention at all in the work of the CBD since it started. That we perhaps were on conservation and maybe a little bit on ABS, but also not very strongly on that. So these 3 objectives is what parties or stakeholders really want to see reflected in a balanced manner. But also the other element for the post-2020 is the issue of biosafety, that it should be there. If you look at the current strategic plan, you will see that actually the issue of biosafety completely is missing there. But that is not going to be the case this time around. This is going to be a framework that will consider the 3 objectives of the CBD plus the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety, and of course those issues on ABS. There was a question which I would like the Secretariat, before maybe if I could make a mistake on the dates, that when will the sustainable use webinar take place? I think I've seen that, and perhaps the date is around August, September, but Sasha, maybe you could throw more light there, Sasha and Jyoti.
Yes, Francis, definitely I can repeat that we expecting notification on sustainable use consultations being issued very soon. And consultations will have several elements, the webinars, but also questionnaire in between. And the first introductory webinar we are planning for the end of this month, and specific date, again, please follow notifications. And the concluding webinar will happen at the end of August, early September, with the view that the report of this consultation will be ready by the end of September and definitely available for Substat 24 and SBI, but of course also for third meeting of the open-ended working group. Thank you.
Thank you very much, co-chairs and secretariat. Of course, on the timeline, we have scheduled by the end of July sustainable use, synergies in September, ABS in October, DSI by the end of November, and so on. All of this in preparation of the third meeting of the open-ended working group. And now the time is finished, but I also like to comment very briefly that I also was part of previous strategic plans. And the first one, from 2002 to 2010, no country could reduce the rate of biodiversity loss in the planet. And now, as you know, based on what we're going to see soon on GBO5, and what we have seen on the IPBES global assessment, it clearly shows that we are in a serious crisis and we need to take actions, necessary action, not to renegotiate the convention, but to really fulfill the objectives and what is missing, what we need to do to really address all the articles of the convention, not to negotiate, but what is needed. What are the means of implementations, new goals, new targets? This is what we need to clarify as a roadmap for the next decade. This is very important. So let's move to the second segment of the 4 pieces of today's webinar. On the overview of Substat 24 agenda, item 3 is the process and documents. Next slide, please. So, as initially mentioned, phase 1 on agenda item 3 on post-2020 is this one to facilitate the peer review process. So this phase started in June 30 and will end in July 7 next week. 4 sessions based on time zones. This is the third one. And phase 2 on agenda items 4 to 10 will be later by the end of August. We're still in consultations with Substat Bureau to define the way to do it. So this was a very nice trial to do it by time zones, but we will discuss this later. So there's a number of issues on scientific biology, risk assessment, marine biodiversity, IPBES, agriculture, health, invasive species, but we will revise those in a second round of webinars. There's also other preparatory meetings that are going to be undertaken in 6 languages. At least this round is only in English due to obvious reasons and budgetary matters and technological ones as well. But it's very important. The launch of the Global Biodiversity Outlook 5 will be on September 15, few days in advance to the summit in New York. So this is an important date, and also the joint session with Substat and SBI for the introduction of updated post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework in September 18. So this is before Substat and SBI. This is not draft 1 for negotiation. This is the update version so far done by co-chairs based on discussions in Rome. So the updated version of 0. whatever, not 1, is going to be launched in September 18. Next slide, please. Now, it is very important to know what is the mandate for Substat 24. We have a request from previous Substat in November to consider a document that identifies the range of relevant existing indicators, baseline dates, or other appropriate methods for monitoring changes in biodiversity, indicator gaps, and where relevant options for filling such gaps for a monitoring framework for post-2020. This This is a very important piece to know where we are and how much are we doing progress in implementing. Then we have a specific request from Rome to carry out a scientific and technical review of the updated goals and targets, relate indicators and baselines, the revised appendices from the framework, and to provide advice to the working group at this third meeting. Next slide, please. And I invite you to mute your mics to avoid noise. Updated monitoring framework. So we will have, we receive a request to prepare documents. One will be the update monitoring framework based on the outcomes and in response to our notifications, and to update those elements of the draft post-2020 that were reviewed in the second meeting in Rome, taking into account submissions received in response to a notification 108. You should remember that it was open, this notification to receive elements. This is part of the job of co-chairs in updating this, but we need to fill the remaining elements around. Also, it was a specific request to produce a document with the linkages between proposed goals and targets with the Sustainable Development Goals of Agenda 2030 within the scope of the convention. That was done. Next slide, please. And also, this is a very important slide to talk about how the dynamic in SBSTA is going to be, as in all SBSTA meetings. We want to start with agenda item 3 in particular with the introduction of update goals, milestones, targets by the co-chairs of the open-ended working group as a basis for discussion. Then during plenary session chaired by a SBSTA Bureau member, it will be the first reading of the pre-session documents, where we're expecting to have general reflection and specific comments to draft recommendations and monitoring framework. This is very important to do the best use of the time we have available to have concrete comments on recommendations. So the working document will present recommendations from SBSTA to the third meeting of the open-ended working group with the elements of indicators. If needed, we're going to establish a contact group to deal with these matters along the week with the view to have a CRP document, a conference room paper for consideration based on the feedback from the first reading and the contact group outcomes, and to finish with an L document. L document is the recommendations to the open-ended working group 3. This is one of the products. As any SBSTA meeting, we're going to finish with a number of L documents, one for every agenda item of the different topics. So for the potential contact groups, we will need to define the mandate, modalities, and the co-chairs. Usually are 2 co-chairs, one from developing country and another from a developed country to have a balance on the views. So this is usually the procedure. So just to let you know, next slide, please. Also, it's been regarding peer review process. As we were mentioned, it was a notification indicating that currently there are 3 documents for peer review. One will turn into the Add One document 3 with the updated draft monitoring framework, another one on indicators from GBIF, and the links between SDGs and Global Biodiversity Framework. It's very important for you to know when you see these documents on the peer review that updated goals and targets are not for peer review, are not for negotiation. That part will be addressed at the third meeting of the open-ended working group. Documents posted in the website on the peer review from June 25th 25 are open until July 25. So still a number of days, 20 days for you to reply and to help us in enhancing the content and the quality, not negotiations, not national positions. what we need to know if there is additional information, new indicators, how to improve the quality of these documents from the technical and scientific point of view. Next slide, please, Elizabeth. So we have a number of notifications for the peer review process, and also these are the links. You can go to SBSTTA web page to see documents already available, and in particular for agenda item 3, then you can see information documents. And there is a link also to a peer review process. So those documents still on the draft versions after peer review will turn either on pre-session documents or information documents that will be the basis to support negotiations and the work of SBSTA. Next slide, please. So with this, we go now to the second phase of questions and answers. I see that is already a number of questions in the chat. Can Secretariat say any more on plans on Biodiversity Summit? I think this is part of what we're going to see later. Adriana Vidal, IUCN, could you please clarify what are the opportunities for parties and non-parties to submit inputs to the draft Global Biodiversity Framework? I understand that submissions can be made to the draft to the post before SBSTA SBI. Will there be submissions requests after draft 1.0 post before open-ended working group 3? Maria Luisa del Rio Mispireta from Peru, should have webinars for another items agenda? Yes. Like synthetic biology and others, the idea will be the whole package of remaining agenda items from 4 to 10 are going to be in a second round later by the end of August or beginning September. Basil already responded, is now on formal negotiations. Input has now come from parties. SBSTA and SBI remain in thematic consultations. Input from SBSTA and SBI can come from all. Melania Munoz Garcia, will this presentation will be available in the CBD website? Will be very useful. I know that at least the video will be there. I hope also we can share these presentations. Phasing, 3 objectives is fine, but the operative articles are important. Will GBF be cherry pick articles or encompass the substance of all the articles? If it doesn't, would it mean that de facto renegotiation? This is a matter of concern, as there are stakeholders even claiming that CBD is not legally binding or frame on a law and such unfounded arguments. We have legally binding CBD. Shouldn't our focus be enforcing on provisions for the CBD rather than the convenient ones or developed countries? GBF can, in any case, only urge parties and is not legally binding at the CBD. It can report, not have a clear preamble statement about how regard every operative articles. And then Shestakov is responding. This entire presentation as well as recording will be available. Stephen Woodley, at what point the goals and targets be subject to scientific sorry, my screen jumped to scientific peer review, goals and targets. Then Joyce put a number of links there. Frederick Wolf, the GBF goals and targets still not agreed and can be still changed substantially. We will discuss indicators tailored to these targets now, how we deal with changing targets. Can we adapt the indicators? That's my understanding, yes, but we cannot wait and do nothing until everything is agreed to start developing indicators. That's why we are working simultaneously. And of course, the last word will be by the COP when the framework is adopted and necessary changes to improve targets and to improve indicators and monitoring framework has to be done as well. Two questions from Jorge Murillo. What is the document chapeau of agenda item 3? This one will include the draft recommendation. Yes. How do you hope to collect the reflection from this agenda item within the recommendation of SBSTTA 24 to the open-ended working group 3? I will ask my colleagues from the Secretariat to respond as well. Will you work on a general report, or will any of the 3 documents prepared for peer review be used as a reference to guide discussions? Yes, they will help. This clarity is also useful for our national consultation process. Yes. And we recommend reviewing the annotated agenda of SBSTTA, since on the agenda item 3, there is a series of numerical references to documents prepared for the session that have errors and can cause confusion. Thank you very much, Jorge. Now I give the floor to co-chairs to respond some of the questions as well as please, co-chair.
Thank you, Ezekiel. So similarly to last time, I'll start and then Francis can complete. A number of important questions. I'm not necessarily going to take them in chronological order. Stephen Woodley asked about scientific advice on the target, and indeed there is a very important distinction, which is about we're not asking the SBSTTA to do negotiation of the target language. That's the prerogative of the open-ended working group. But you will see, and we'll talk about that in the coming slides, that we've decomposed those goals and targets into components, and we are asking your advice on those components. In addition, later in the process, SBSTTA will need to provide us with some advice on the numerical aspect of the targets, and that's going to be a very important part of the advice that SBSTTA is going to give to the open-ended working group. Friedrich asked about this question that comes back in every session. As we're in the process of negotiating the targets, what happened as the target change? So we presented draft 0. We got the reaction in Rome. Obviously, it is the prerogative of the parties to do a 180-degree change to their direction at any point in time. However, I'm fairly confident that we had a good sense of what the parties want to see. There will be change, there will be adaptation, but I don't see any major departure from the structure. And as such, I think the advice that SBSTTA will be giving is going to be very important. Finally, from our colleague Fazi, there is that whole notion about means of implementation, enabling condition, and transparency and responsibility, which were very important, and that's definitely not a small piece of the discussion we're going to have. Today, we're focusing on the SBSTTA part of the business. Later, we will be coming back, and Charlotta is on the call today, and she's the chair of the SBI. So we will have, and we're really looking forward. We know that a number of those aspects are critical to the success of our GBF, and trust us, we will be back. And it's just a matter of practicality that we have to divide the agenda in various pieces, and we cannot bring all of them together in one session. So we have to cut the pie in various pieces to be able to get through it. Over to you, Francis.
Thank you, Co-Chair. I think just to build on from the point about means of implementation, we know this is, of course, going to be very, very critical for the framework, because however much the framework is looking good, it definitely has to be implemented. So the means of implementation comes as a very important aspect of this framework. So the sections E to H, as you've said, Chair, that is where now next we will be working closely with SBI Chair, and we hope that those issues could be addressed in there. But we know that this is a very important aspect as well of the framework. Then something that was said about indicators, there's the changing targets, and which I think you've touched on, Chair. And thirdly, you said that we do not expect to see a very major change in those targets. And I think that is the spirit in which we are moving with. We, of course, have to take into account that the current strategic plan, when it was being developed, the issues of indicators, was considered much later. And that dragged, I think that even affected implementation or reporting on progress of implementation of those targets, because indicators were being discussed way back, somewhere even after 5 years down the road. So this time around, this is why we are making all the efforts to make sure that as we keep reviewing and maybe adjusting, updating these targets, that also we look at the indicators. So our prayer, of course, is that given what came out from Rome, that we are not going to see very major departures from what we have maybe updated. And if it is there, then we should, as stakeholders, really, make that spirit of discussion flexible enough for us to agree fast enough on those indicators, so that this time around, the framework and the indicators and those means of implementation, they are as a package at once, not to begin looking at these things later on once the framework is adopted at COP15. Thank you.
Thank you very much, co-chairs. Now I give the floor to Sasha.
Thank you, Shekel. I think that, again, most questions were responded. I probably will make 2 points. One for a question from Frederick, related again on time for discussing or approving indicators. I just like to remind that SBSTTA is not approving indicators, and that the approval of indicators, if comes, will be done by COP. And after SBSTTA, the third meeting of the Open Audit Working Group will consider the updated monitoring framework, also corresponding to the draft one. And then, of course, all those documents will come to COP15 for the final consideration. And of course, also parties at COP15 may decide the way they like to proceed with indicators. They may approve some of them, they may require development of some further indicators to be adopted, let's say, by COP16. So there are some options there, and definitely SBSTTA is not the final stage of discussion on indicators. And a couple points also, Jorge, for your questions. So we definitely will check again annotated agenda for SBSTTA 24 to see if there are any discrepancies. The next presentation will come more in details of all documents, but probably jumping a little bit ahead. So I would like to remind about the entire package related to Post-2020. So we will have 2 pre-session documents. That's the document 3, which will be a usual SBSTTA document, which includes notes from Executive Secretary and, of course, draft recommendations of SBSTTA. And this document will have an addendum 1, which is draft monitoring framework. So that's actually the document you have in front of you for peer review. And we will issue the updated version of this document after peer review at the end of August, together with all other documents. So, and we will have also a package of information documents. 2 of them, again, are just in front of you for peer review, and another one is also in front of you for your background information. And as already was said, the entire framework with updated elements, as after discussions in Rome, also will be available in August. So the whole package of basically 6 documents of different status, only 2 of them are for consideration by SBSTTA, document 3 and addendum 1 to this document 3, will be available for you basically 2 months in advance of SBSTTA for your work, your consultation process, etc. So I hope also that those connections among documents will be more clear from the next section of this webinar. Thank you, Sasha.
Thank you very much, Sasha. I would like to remind you that we should look for the mandate we receive as a scientific body to focus on the scientific and technical analysis, mainly on indicators and the baselines and the monitoring framework, not to negotiate goals and targets. The whole piece is going to be analyzed in the third meeting of the open-ended working group. And of course, elements regarding implementations, means of implementations, and accountability and more elements are going to be dealt on the framework of SBI as well, and including the feedback from the remaining thematic consultations to have the whole piece together. I don't see more questions, and of course we will revise the agenda, the annotated agenda, to be precise. All these webinars have been very important and informative to help you to have more clarity in how to deal with and to prepare and to do the best of our contribution according to the mandate of software to the process. I think we finish with this, the time for this questions and answers segment. Can we have next slide, please? And we are about to have a short break or fill again cups of coffee and use the washroom if you wish so. So let's reconvene in 5 minutes more. Thank you very much. Welcome back to the third part of today's webinar. Can we please see next slide, please? To continue with the overview of Substat 24 Agenda Item 3 documents. And for this part, I invite my colleagues, co-chairs, to give the presentation of Item 3 documents. Please, co-chairs, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ezekiel. And I'll be taking over for Francis to present the next few slides. So, slide 23 give you some details on where we are on the document. The document, agenda item 3, main document, will be available in August. Add 1 is the one that is now for peer review. You will be able to comment on it over the next 4 weeks, and then the secretary will come back, update the document, and it will come for a second review for 6 weeks prior to the Substat face-to-face meeting. We will be also providing you with some detail on the supporting document towards the end of this presentation. You will see details about the annotation on the term and the concept we used, and Sasha will present that. It is posted online now. There is some detailed information on the indicators, which is on the process for peer review. There is also an important document about the linkage between the Sustainable Development Goals and the GBF. So, and basically the updated language on the framework will be available in August. Before we go to the next slide, just want to be doing a check with Ezekiel. Can you hear me well? Okay, great. So let's go to the next slide. Here you see a little bit more detail about how the Add 1 document, the pre-session document, is presented. So it is in the format of a table, going from left to right. On the left, you get the revised language of the goals and milestones and targets as discussed in Rome, reflecting the discussion in Rome, and that's provided for context for you. Then we've tried, and you will see example over the following slide. You will see example on how we've decomposed those goals and targets into components to facilitate your work on monitoring elements. So for each of those components, you get one or several monitoring elements, and in turn indicators, and then finally some advice on the availability of baseline information. So important to specify that at this point in time, we're not asking Substat to negotiate on the appropriate baseline. What we're asking Substat to tell us is what is available in terms of information, periodicity, etc. Again, below you'll see the support document that I have described in the previous slide, the annotation, the indicators, and the links between the SDG and the GBF. So Elizabeth, if you can go to the next slide. On that slide, you will see in a second, here we go, you will remember and recognize the language of the framework, the zero draft presented in January. So this is exactly the same. The only thing that has been added is the information in red about what you've asked us to merge. The open-ended working group in Rome asked us to merge goal A, B, and C. So you see that surrounded by a red line. And then you ask us to collapse the sub-item under nature provides. So that, again, you see that. And then finally, you've asked us to merge target 17 and 20 under tools and solution. So now the following slide will show you how we try to do that, as well as show you some other change we made. So going again from right to left, you see a new articulation of goal A, B, and C, which is around, and we'll go into the detail of the wording in a second, ecosystem, species, and genetic diversity. Below that, you get the single goal around nature contribution to people. The same C, which is around benefit sharing access. And then you've asked us to add a new goal, a fourth goal about means of implementation. Now, when we looked at that structure with goals for 2050 and targets to be reached by 2030, we felt that there was a missing element in order to be able to see if we're really making progress. And that's why we're proposing those milestones, which are really interim step in reaching the 2050 goals. And in a second, we'll show you the value of those proposed milestones. But before we move there, there is two other changes that we would like to present to you. On the reducing threat side, you've told us that there was a need to have new targets around species. So we've created new target 3, which is around recovery for threatened species and conservation action for common species that are not otherwise covered by other targets in this series. And then finally, on the tools and solution, no major change in the targets language, but we felt it may be simpler and easier to communicate if we did some reordering, and we're proposing that to you. Namely, keeping the two mainstreaming targets side by side, 14 and 15, followed by sustainable consumption and responsible choice, which is the same as the merge described the previous slide, the one on biosafety, and then bringing side by side the incentive and subsidies and the resource mobilization. And then again, we have not touched the last two ones. So if we can move to the next slide, we'll say a few more words about the milestones. So basically what we felt was useful is to have a way to be able to say in 2030 whether we're making progress toward the vision, or if there is no progress toward that vision, how we can change course of action to get there. And we felt it was important to have a measurable attribute to the goals and be able to ensure parties need to have the assurance that we're taking the right action. So even if there may be a need to modify course of action if we're not making remarkable progress and yet all the actions are taken, or whether there is some action that we're not taking. So that's a very quick summary of the rationale. Moving to the following slide, you will see a table here, and it was useful for us to show you a little bit where we are with the indicators. So the top table is about goals, and you will see that with 4 goals we got 14 components. Those 14 components decompose in 56 elements, and you will see that there is proposal already for 44 indicators. But the targets, there is 20 targets, as you know, so 68 components, 156 elements, and the proposal at this point in time, 136 indicators. Want to point out that it is not possible to directly add the indicators. There is a degree of overlap, and that's quite all right. So you have about 150 unique indicators at this point in time. Keep that in mind. Is that the right number of indicators? Is there a need to identify a subset? Some have talked about headline indicators. Do you want to add to that list? Those are all important consideration. Now, let's move to the next slide, and we're going to get into the detail. And we've chosen to present to you one example around goals and 2 examples around targets to see how the table is organized. As mentioned earlier, you see goal A, which is around the area, connectivity, integrity of ecosystem, healthy and resilient population of species, reducing number of species threatened, and maintaining genetic diversity. So that decompose into 6 elements. The 6 elements are increased extent of natural ecosystem integrity, connectivity, preventing extinction, and improve the conservation status of species, increase the number and the health of common species, genetic diversity, and protecting critical ecosystems. So we choose to decompose that one a goal into 6 components. We're asking you to tell us whether those components are adequately covering the target. But let's look, and we choose one of those components, A3, just to show you some of the elements. So if we can now turn to the following slide, and Sasha, if you could help us through the description of that table. Sasha, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Basil. Yes, as you can see probably already, the original document issued for peer review, monitoring framework is developed same way for both for goals and for targets. And also you will see two new columns there compared to initial draft, which was annexed to the zero draft of the global biodiversity framework. So the one is actually the column explaining components. And this column was developed to facilitate consideration of the monitoring framework, but also to provide better understanding of each goal and target. And that's partially also back to the question previously asked by Stephen at whether SBSTTA will provide scientific and technical advice on a substance or not. So that's exactly the way how we invite SBSTTA to do that, to consider whether proposed components are enough, or some of them redundant, or they can be reformulated, because that will actually inform later on the work of co-chairs on updating potentially the language of goals and targets. So the monitoring elements stays the same as in a previous version of monitoring table. And those monitoring elements are describing trends in specific elements to be measured to see the progress against goal or target. And then, of course, specific indicators. For indicators, I just like to stress some principles, how those indicators chosen at this point of time, which of course, again, will require your consideration during peer review and your further suggestions. So first of all, the indicators which already exist, we're taking into consideration. Exist means that they are operational indicators. They have methodology for measuring them, they have data available, they have probably already a series of data through some years, and usually they have some institution or institutions which actually are monitoring them and in a way owning them. So that means that we know where to go to get this information. Those indicators also were derived from several major groups of indicators, definitely those which were used before for Aichi targets, as well as those indicators considered previously by SBSTTA and overall by the CBD system. The SDG indicators, and you will see in the table that there is a direct reference when SDG indicators were used. Indicators provided, as discussed also before, by biodiversity indicators partnership, but also some indicators which are currently in use by other international processes and multilateral agreements. So the new column, which is the most right-hand column, is a new one compared to the version from Rome. That's actually presents the periods of baseline data availability. So it's not baselines per se, and we are not talking about identifying particular year of for baseline for indicator. But the idea was that this information may further facilitate your discussions whether some specific indicator is needed or not, whether a specific indicator can be used or not, because it's actually provide you an information whether data is available and what is a period of time that information for this particular indicator is available. So again, we see it as a supportive information for consideration by SBSTA of the issue of baselines. So later on, when we come to a description of information documents, then I will be talking more about the linkages between pre-session documents and of course the draft monitoring framework, as I mentioned already, as documents 3 addendum 1 is a pre-session document for consideration by SBSTA. For all those columns you see currently on this slide, that means there's the only one exception, the first call of goals, language of goals and targets and milestones, as co-chairs mentioned several times before. But all those 4 columns will be for review, discussion, and advice from SBSTA to open-ended working group. Thank you, Basil.
Thank you, Sasha. So with that in mind, let's move quickly through a couple more examples on target, and if we can move to the next slide. We just picked randomly a couple, not randomly, like the first one that came around. So here you will see one target, and we took one target from the biodiversity loss package and one from the meeting people needs. So target 1. By 2030, 50% of land and sea area globally are under special planning, addressing land sea use change, retaining most of the existing intact and wilderness area, and allow to restore X% of degraded freshwater, marine, and terrestrial ecosystem connectivity. And then just choosing to focus on the first element, which is the increase in the area of terrestrial and freshwater and marine under spatial planning. You can see that there is 4 monitoring elements. Obviously, the trends in area under planning, the trends under coastal land management, the trend in marine spatial planning, and trend in integrated resource management, water resource management. And then you see some indicators there, and then there is some blanks where there is none that are currently in use at this point in time. And you see some information about the availability of the data. So let's move now to the second example on the following slides, which is target 9. Support the productivity, sustainability, and resilience of biodiversity in agriculture and other managed landscape, managed ecosystems through conservation and sustainable use of such ecosystem. So here you get agriculture, you get aquaculture, you get forestry, and we just picked forestry to illustrate the scheme and the way we want to organize things. So sustainable management of forests, and the monitoring elements is trend in proportion of area under sustainable practice, and the indicators is SDG indicator 15.2.1. Also, and an alternative is the forest under FSC and PFC certification scheme. You see the data in terms of availability, and in terms of when it comes and the last available data. So that provides, and when you go to the table, you will see that you have a similar explanation or similar format for the other. So Ezekiel, this completes this section of our presentation. It's back to you now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, co-chairs and Sasha. As you see in this segment, you have the opportunity to see how these documents are prepared for consideration of substandard preparation, currently also for the peer review, how the new goals and targets updated by co-chairs that were provided to the Secretariat were used as a basis to create these documents. So we saw the example of a goal and the information on the targets. We have already 68 components identified, 154 monitoring elements, and 136 indicators to discuss in SBSTA on the information accompanying the new version of goals and targets. Bearing in mind that they are not open for negotiation, goals and targets, all the information on components, monitoring elements, indicators, baselines, data availability those are the elements that we're going to be discussing. We saw the example of a goal. We saw 2 examples of targets. So this is how we are constructing the information around. Of course, the last word will be by the COP with the adoption of this. So now I open the floor for questions. It was a previous one from SBSTTA, but this is more related to implementation, and I prefer to defer these discussions when we deal with SBI. Sue Lieberman for WCS. I do recognize that there are too many indicators. Through the scientific and technical peer review process, these are likely to be indicators that can and should be removed. They may not be as relevant to the new goals and targets or have been superseded. But there is also be indicators that are highly relevant and should be added. There has been a lot of recently research, for example, on the Forestry Integrity Index. I hope that there is a flexibility based on scientific and technical input. Thank you, Sue. C. Shoban, agree with Susan's comments. Yes, Giobon. Evelyn Vera, my understanding was that there is room for new indicators, of course, when needed, but I was going to prefer use existing indicators. Adriana Vidal from IUCN, in which degree new indicators will be considered? Will the substance recommend only indicators that are established? No, it's not the case. There are a few monitoring elements that I don't have indicators assigned. Yes, of course. That's why we're trying to compile as much as possible information to see the whole picture, to see if there are gaps, to know where we are, and if those indicators are really addressing the questions and the goals and the targets that everybody is constructing. In some cases, there are very difficult questions that are difficult to measure in terms of implementation. And this is something that we need to face. This is part of the reality check. Gadir, in terms of process, SBSTTA could provide advice on adding indicators, then through right. Also, it is expected that SBSTTA will provide concrete numeric advice on baselines, for example, then to be decided, addressed by open-ended working group 3. Yes, SBSTTA will provide advice on this. We have to do the analysis. We can provide advice to the open-ended working group that will see the whole piece together. Friedrich Wolf, to sum things up, parties and observers can comment on every column A to D except for the first on targets and goals. That's right. And this is what we expect to receive in the peer review process. Once these documents turn into pre-session documents are also open for debates and consultations. Yes, so far with this set of questions, now I turn to co-chairs and secretary to respond. You have the floor.
Thank you. And it's interesting to see the flow of the question, and I think we're reaching our objective of establishing that level of understanding. I want to come back a bit about the importance of the work that SBSTTA will be doing. This is we're managing a complex process, Francis and I, which is bringing together a negotiation. And then it's extremely valuable to us to get that science advice that guide the negotiation, that will tell us from a science perspective what is in the heart of the possible, but also what is needed to reach our goal. So appreciate and respectfully the negotiation that will take place. But here in the CBD, we get that significant luxury of having a scientific body like yours in SBSTTA that is able to provide us with guidance and facilitate our work. So I'm sure most parties will agree with me that giving us that clear scientific advice will be very useful to ensure that we're not stepping outside and inadvertently taking action at a level that will not enable us to reach the vision. So I think the question, in a sense, have been answered. We're seeing how the various pieces fits together. I see Jorge just typed in a question about the link to the SDGs. We've been trying to at the same time as we were building the paper on the linkage to the SDG, to see how much of the SDG indicators we can reuse in our own. You see the reference to those where possible. It is possible that we've missed a couple and there is more to be referenced to, but the operating principle was to reuse as much as possible existing indicators and create good links. So Francis, maybe you want to add some to that.
There was another comment seen from RHM Abeyokun, I hope that is how the name is pronounced, that the target, we seem to have very many indicators. Can we reduce on the indicators? I think this is something that should be, scientifically agreed upon by SBSTTA, but for now, I think it is really to look at those targets, those indicators that potentially could work there. But I think when we go into the debate at SBSTTA, then we need to be looking at really the indicators that could perhaps deliver us on those targets. I do agree that many indicators can be problematic because you have to collect data on each indicator, and it can be a very challenging task, especially at country level. But I think SBSTTA will do a good job there when we get to that stage.
Thank you very much, co-chairs. Secretariat, you have the floor.
So at a couple of points, I mean, obviously that peer review process is designed to bring also new indicators. You may see that there are a number of gaps for many monitoring elements. So then definitely you are invited to bring indicators. I think what co-chairs were also trying to send a message that we already have many. And I see one of the questions that maybe it's already too many indicators, that the whole peer review is not just to bring new indicators, it's actually also to consider relevance of those indicators already included into the framework and consider the entire set of them to see which of them are really needed and which maybe not, as well as probably advice on kind of tiers of indicators, which may further help probably to clarify a kind of more limited number of indicators, including the potential use of headline indicators. So again, definitely feel free to provide indicators additional. What we will be asking you to do, of course, when you're doing that together with your indicator, you provide information around this indicator, whether data is available or not, whether methodology is available or not, whether this indicator is actually can be disaggregated at national level or not, whether you know any organization who is dealing with this indicator and can be a partner to provide measurements, but also provide data for this indicator. So just to be as specific in your suggestions as possible. It's also clear that at the final stage, most probably the global monitoring framework will actually include different type of indicators, hopefully with majority of them being active indicators in use, but also probably some indicators which still need to be developed, and that's definitely a decision by parties. If they see some extremely important monitoring elements and there are no currently available ready indicators, those indicators most probably need to be developed, and that's need to be clearly decided by parties when adopting the framework and its monitoring framework, as well as, of course, articulating based on lessons from Aichi targets, articulating more clearly the period when those indicators need to be developed. So I see also a question from Jorge. Again, we will come to information documents just at the next few slides. So, but yes, definitely the document for peer review, the draft monitoring framework includes most of indicators from information document prepared by UNEP WCMC. And yes, draft monitoring framework includes most of indicators mentioned in another information document on linkages with global biodiversity framework and SDGs. And also, yes, when we will be working on the final version of those documents in August, to be sent already to SBSTTA. So we definitely will ensure that there is a good level of coherence between draft monitoring framework in press session document addendum 1 and information document on indicators and information document on links between SDGs and global biodiversity framework. So that will be done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sasha. Certainly, it will be very important, your contribution for the peer review versions of these documents. Of course, we're going to have a pre-session document with the recommendation containing many elements, including the addendum with a set of indicators that we identify as the key ones. And of course, the document from WCMC, and this is also responding to some of the questions of Jorge Murillo, includes much more detail. So it's preferable to see the whole variety of indicators we have, identify gaps, identify the needs to create new ones that really address the points we need. It would be different indicators to see progress on goals than targets, for example. And there are different types of targets that will require different types of indicators at the global level, at regional level, and national level. So that this will be a try to put all pieces together and then to identify the key ones independently of the many options. So that will be the difference in indicators from addendum 1 to document 3 to the final version of also the information document with all the myriad of potential indicators that we may use. So this is part of the discussions that we're going to have in SBSTTA, and that are making me very nervous in how to deal with all these tasks. Now, going to the questions, we have still 5 minutes. I hope I respond a little bit to the question of Jorge Murillo and how the paper on synergies with SDGs being reflected in the monitoring framework. So far, it's been a concrete request to guide discussions from Rome. Indicators for SDGs relevant to GB have been already included in this update monitoring framework. We will see. Also, SBSTTA chair, since we hear frequent reference to SBSTTA as a scientific body, my understanding is that it's scientific, equally technical in terms of legal, policy, social issues. Is this correct? Well, this is subject to interpretation. Scientific and technical elements are very important. How far can we go into the legal policy? It's quite difficult to draw a clear line, but certainly we have a subsidiary body for implementation that can deal with some of these points. And also the role of SBSTTA is also, we're going to try to cover as much as possible all goals and targets by providing proposals to indicators. Donation Gustav, how are targets and indicator in scale translate to developing state, especially seeds? This question is important, especially for monitoring and reporting on national targets that are not aligned with those proposed. Yes, this is a situation, a fractal situation. One thing is when we see from the global perspective to national perspective to local perspective. And this is also opening the door for countries that wish to have national targets that can go even beyond the convention or the new framework that we're going to agree next year. And of course, will be part of the new reports national reports to indicate the progress in implementing the strategic plan, the new one. Noah Steiner, will means of implementation target indicators is expected to be reflected in a general indicator framework, or will be under the party reporting template? Those are elements that we also need to define. To my understanding, there are higher level indicators to see progress of a goal, and there are very specific targets, indicators to see targets. And we need to do the summary at regional or global level, but also to identify clearly what happened at national level. All right. So with this, I go back again to co-chairs if they want to respond to some elements, followed by Secretariat. You have the floor.
Thank you. No, you did a good job, Ezekiel. There is very little to add. Just one, maybe a couple points. On the question from Noah Steiner, it's important to keep in mind the theory of change where at the center, and perhaps we can go back to slide 26, which I think is the one where we have yes, that's the one. So while Elizabeth is doing that, remember the theory of change. There was on the rightmost vision, then we move to the goal, then we move to the center of the mission, which is, here we go, that's the one. And then you have the action targets, which are addressing directly the drivers of biodiversity loss. Those are the blue box. Below that, we have the second objective of the convention in orange, which is the meeting people needs, and then the third objective of access and benefit sharing in yellow. And that is supported by the brown boxes, which are the tools. And around that, there is that C-shaped gray area for means of implementation, enabling condition, and responsibility and transparency. And by no way the choice of colors is expressing a prioritization. They're just as important. We realize that actually, in order to be able to fulfill and to reach those goals, we're going to need to have very, very solid plans for the means of implementation for enabling condition. And that's where you're going to find it. At this point in time, the work of SBSTTA is focused on the center, on the action targets and the goal. But as we move and have the discussion on the SBI side, and we work with Charlotta, we're going to be putting a lot more details around those elements. Some of those details will be in the GBF itself. Some may be in annexes if you choose. If the party choose, that's the right way to do it. And then finally, some of the decision will be in the COP15 package. So they're equally important. It happens that up to this point in time, I think a lot of us have focused our work. We started our work by the action, but that by no means we're diminishing the importance of the rest. So Francis, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Coach. I was trying to reflect on the comments by Donatian Gustave, that is, how are the targets and indicators scaled, translated to developing states, especially seeds? We have to say here that as co-chairs, as we try our best to really work on these targets, we are trying to take on board a number of considerations across the board, looking at how these targets could best be implemented, given, of course, disparity among countries. So we are trying our best to really come with the targets and indicators that could work across the board. But if there will be situations where it is seen that maybe some of them would not be possible in some instances, then we could be alerted over that. But we are trying our best really in the updating of these targets and those indicators to see that it can be implemented across the board. That is just the general comment I would say to that issue raised by Gustav.
Thank you very much, Francis. Sasha, last comment. We ran out of time.
No, thanks, Ezekiel. I think think was covered.
Thank you very much. Now let's go back to the presentation for the last part of today's webinar, and I give the floor back to Sasha to give us information on the preparation of information documents for agenda item 3. Please, Sasha, you have the floor.
Thank you. So this next few slides, I will guide you through information documents in front of you. 2 of them are for peer review, 1 of them is for information. So the first one is the document which was not really mandated by the Open-Ended Working Group 2, but it was decided to be developed by co-chairs in response to discussions in Rome during the second meeting of the Open-Ended Working Group. So for those of you who attended this meeting, you may remember that during negotiations on zero draft and discussions on particular goals and targets, many participants were asking questions to clarify use of different terms and also different concepts in the language of goals and targets. That's why co-chairs decided to develop this document. And I like also to stress that this information document is not for peer review, it's just for your information and as a background to provide a better understanding of meaning of updated language of goals and targets. And also this document is not a legal glossary with legal terms. It's actually the annotations to those terms to just explain what co-chairs mean when they use one or another term in the language of goals and targets. So again, it's just a document to facilitate your consideration during peer review, but of course also consideration of documents during Subset 24. So next slide, please. So another information document, which was actually mandated and requested by the Open-Ended Working Group at its second meeting, is on linkages between Sustainable Development Goals and Global Biodiversity Framework. And this document is peer review. So the mandate from Open-Ended Working Group was requesting the Executive Secretary to develop such a document and make this document available prior Subset 24 meeting. And this document, of course, will be available both for Subset 24 and, of course, also for SBIS 3 as well. So we were trying to capture 3 major elements in this document. One is definitely trying to show the linkages how Global Biodiversity Framework may contribute to the implementation of Sustainable Development Goals. Find the correspondence between all draft goals and targets of Global Biodiversity Framework to some of, or actually many of development goals, basically almost all of them, but also a good number of sustainable development targets. And again, help to see the Global Biodiversity Framework as another tool for implementation of SDGs. So another task was to show the potential way forward for those SDG targets which have 2020 as a deadline year for delivery. And we know that there is a number of targets of this type, including under goals 14 and 15, but also under other goals, and which are pretty much relevant to biodiversity issues. So again, the same approach. We were trying to articulate and identify those draft Global Biodiversity Framework goals and targets, and especially targets, which actually may help to continue work on those so-called 2020 SDG targets. And the last point in this document was to also demonstrate what potentially can be used of SDG indicators to support monitoring framework for global biodiversity framework goals and targets, but also to provide a general review of other elements of the framework and how those elements related more to implementation or to the overall considerations, like, for example, relations and engagement with business and some other points, how that can be actually built on what is already in SDG, and also how SDG can further support global biodiversity framework. And again, this is for peer review, so your views, your ideas on those elements will be useful. And of course, as any other documents based on comments received, they will issue the new version of this document being available for SBSTTA 24. And there is also a simple template for you to provide comments. Next slide, please. So the last document in this package is information document or indicators for global biodiversity framework. This document was basically based on mandate coming from SBSTTA 23 and also Open Edit Working Group 2. As you know well that the first draft and first version of this information document was presented to SBSTTA 23. And after SBSTTA 23, it was actually issued for peer review and received a number of comments predominantly from observers and different stakeholders rather than parties. And a reviewed version was also available around Open Edit Working Group 2. So after Rome meeting, our colleagues in UNEP CMC did a great job to further update this document. And the objective is to provide a more detailed technical background for those indicators which we plan to use in the draft monitoring framework. So while preparing this document, the WCMC was, of course, working on submissions, but also information from Biodiversity Indicators Partnership. Next slide, please. So the document has two major elements. The one is more narrative, and narrative is covering, of course, approaches WCMC took while putting those indicators together, including criteria for selection and development of indicators. They also discuss in the narrative roles and linkages between global and national indicators. And there is also a special section devoted to consideration of potential baselines. Next slide, please. But of course, the major part of the document is pretty extensive and long table. And there are many questions about linkages between draft monitoring framework and this information document. There are, of course, direct linkages. As I mentioned already, most of indicators from information documents were actually used to populate a draft monitoring table. But of course, compared to monitoring framework, the information document provides a lot of additional technical details about each indicator, and you can see it on slide. So it actually includes whether the indicators already used by any other process, whether, for example, they were used in GBO4, or whether they are actually SDG indicator, or indicators proposed by the indicator partnerships, or actually used in other and multilateral agreements. So this table also provides whether there is a specific institution which has information and play a kind of a role of custodian for a particular indicator. It's also provide information in relation of indicator to, let's say, national or global level, and whether the indicator can be disaggregated at national level, or it is an indicator which actually was aggregated from national level data. It's also telling you whether the methodology for assessment of indicator is available or not. It provides very important information of last update, but also date of availability of information for indicator, as well as whether this indicator is really active indicator or it's under development and will be actually developed very quickly and provide some information on those expectations. So again, the purpose of the document was not only to help co-chairs and secretariats and substitute to develop the draft monitoring framework, but of course to facilitate your discussions at SBSTA when you will consider different indicators and make your advice whether one or another indicator to be included or not to be included into monitoring framework, with full understanding of implications of including or not including those indicators in terms of additional work, data available, finding the partners, etc. So, but again, as we already discussed at the last Q&A session, so you can see that there are some gaps for many monitoring elements. Information documents being also based first of all and focused first of all on existing operational indicators, probably missed a number of indicators which are very important, but are not fully developed. So that's of course need to be updated. And again, as I mentioned before, when you will provide your comments and your changes to this information document, then of course, please try to provide information for all columns of the table, because then we will need to have a full understanding what kind of indicator we are dealing with, including those indicators you propose, but also to see clearly the gaps associated whether with monitoring elements or gaps associated with a particular indicator in terms of data available, or let's say scalability between national and global scale. And of course, also what is very important is that indicators are already used in some other process. As you all remember that the entire global biodiversity framework is a framework for everyone. It's not just only for CBD. And we expect that all other players, all other stakeholders will find their place and their role in the framework. So that's why it's definitely also will be probably good and useful for them to see the indicators which they use in their work. So I stop here, and again, we'll be happy to answer any further questions. Thank you, Seka. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Sasha. Can we see next slide? I think we are now in the last session of questions and answers. Now you have more elements on the nature of information documents. I see a question from Luciana on if document 11 will not be negotiated. No, will not. Usually information documents are not for negotiation, are references that we can use to support our debates. There are important concepts such as nature-based solutions, which have no multilaterally agreed definition, of course. As part of these definitions are also ecosystem-based solutions. There's a difference in these two terms, and the importance of ecosystems while looking in the view of climate change, for example, but I think that there is room for improvement to have more definitions together on this matter, and I allow the Secretary later to respond. Frederick Wolf on SDGs linkages. Have those in charge of SDGs Agenda 2030 had a look into the document on the linkages between or is there a plan to include or invite them in the peer review? The peer review is open to everybody. Just please be aware that for these documents, there's a template where you can include your information. Secretary will take all responses, all feedback, and of course will update the document based on the quality and the contributions on this to enhance the document. It will be a record of contributions, but it's open to everybody. It's not only to parties, it's open to everybody who wants to help to enhance the quality of the document, not to present any national position or negotiation. This is a technical document. All these 3 documents that are open for peer review, you are much welcome to participate to help us to improve it. I don't see more questions so far. So I go back to co-chairs if they want to respond to this.
Thank you, Ezekiel. Very briefly, keep in 2 points. First, keep in mind that the goals and targets will come up for negotiation at open-ended working group 3. So we're looking forward to that discussion at that time. When we did the revision of the language of Draft 0 for you, for Substa, through our work with Francis and the Secretariat, we had those discussions about definition, and we captured those to be able to be consistent within the document. And at the end, we had choice of whether we keep that for ourselves or whether we publish it and make it available to you so you know what we were thinking. Now, when doing that, we were also wondering, it's very easy to spend a lot of time discussing and trying to reach the perfect definition. We all remember the long discussion on glossary of this and that in the various CBD meetings. So that's why we felt that we would just provided it with the proviso that it is only the decision that we used, and we totally realize that the parties may and will have other views, and at the time of open-ended working group 3 will be evolving the discussion. And then finally on the comment from Friedrich, I think we're one message I want to leave with you is we're extremely interested in getting the perspective of the other multilateral environmental agreement. We're very interested in getting their input. We're interested in getting the input from the SDG teams, etc. And I think we're taking the opportunity of this round of calls to encourage folks to give us that. So that's all I have to say for this round. Back to Francis for some more comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Taking on a little bit on the issue of the SDG linkages, whether we have, contacted those maybe who work on the agenda for sustainable development. Secretary can add on here, but in doing this work, we have really worked on consulted, people out there. We think it could have got onto the right hands of people who are versed with this, but at the same time, still there's opportunity to look at this and see whether there are any gaps at all in them. And then on Luciana's comments about definition, yes, as Co-Chair has said, we of course thought this would generate, concerns as being expressed here. But again, it was just to you people to try to see how, as co-chairs, we are trying to progress on certain things so that you could see whether that was the right way of doing it, because there are some of these terminologies to ask about them. And so we tried just to give some understanding of them, not really a definition to say that, just some overview of how we have tried to understand those terms in doing our work. But we would, of course, take this kind of comments coming up on those that document. Thank you.
Thank you very much, co-chairs. Secretariat, Sasha, you have something to say?
I can only reiterate what co-chairs sent at USAQ. So definitely the document on terms and concepts, as I said, it's not a document which is trying to provide definitions, and also our meetings, including SBSTA, are not a meeting to provide legal definition and negotiate definitions. So that's the way co-chairs were using the terms and concepts, and nothing more than that. So parties and others may agree with that or not, and that of course will be reflected through negotiation at the open-ended working group with the language of goals and targets. But at least the idea, as co-chairs explained, was to be really clear what they mean when they use this language. So whether, again, there is an agreement or not, that's a question for, again, discussion at meetings. On SDG linkages, again, we invite everyone to participate. So it's also will be probably a request to all of you that you please use your networks and your partners and your connections to the extent possible to disseminate information about this peer review process. And definitely feel free to invite anybody to provide comments. We also, just a piece of information may be of interest for some of you, that on July 6th, next Monday, there will be a kind of pre-session meeting, as actually on next Tuesday, the high-level political forum starts work in New York in a fully online remote mode. But DESA decided to have a special session on Monday to discuss the future of those SDG targets, which has a deadline this year, 2020. So then also we will present there, and we're definitely also sending invitation to DESA and other partners to be part of this peer review process and provide their views on potential linkages, but also, of course, we like them to be aware that the way global biodiversity framework is designed and developed is to a great extent to support implementation of SDGs. But what is, of course, important also the reporting component, because that will be really good that reports against SDGs will include biodiversity components and help GBF reporting, and vice versa. That reporting on GBF can be also being part of reporting to SDGs, also helping parties to do their reporting and potentially reduce the reporting burden using basically the same piece of information for reporting on different processes. So the whole concept of kind of additional and multiple benefits need to be used here as well. So,
Thank you very much, Sasha. Yes, maybe it's worth to reiterate that regarding information document 11 was not a request from Rome or SBSTA, but co-chairs consider as a good reference to know what definitions are around that may help discussions, but they are only a reference. That's why does not has to be agreed or negotiated. It is just a compilation of some definitions that may help us, but it's only information. And I don't see more questions in the chat at this stage. If there are, I hope everything was clear and we achieve our goal to help you to get familiar with the process in SBSTA and how the preparation is being done for documents, including the peer review process, the documents in particular for agenda item 3, and even there is already a number of documents already published for the remaining agenda items in the web page for Substat 24. We already have the ones on synthetic biology, risk assessment, marine and soils, at least, published. Soon, in the next few weeks, you will see more documents on invasive species, on health, APES, and so on. So, but those will be revised in the following round by the end of August or September. If we don't have more questions from the attendees to this webinar, I give the floor again to co-chairs for some closing remarks, and the secretariat.
Thank you. And there is so many conversation on the chat line. So many of you. I wish we have time to further continue those dialogues. So the one message is Francis and I remain open, and we're happy to have discussion with you. So don't wait for our next webinar to send us a line if you have a question. So we're welcome that. I just wanted to thank you. This is the third of our webinar, and I'm amazed at the level of interest and engagement. This is, in my view, a testimony of the importance of this issue, and you've provided us with a lot of input, and this is nothing compared with what you're going to be providing us through the guidance of Ezekiel and on Substat. So thank you very much for all of you that took the time. If you have a recommendation on how we could do that better in the future, definitely open to that. We will be getting in touch with you. We've talked about the SPI allotment of agenda item and how we're going to be having that conversation. There is a number of steps and webinar coming up over the coming few months, and we're really looking forward to engage with you. So thank you very much. Francis, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Co-Chair. Thank you, everyone. And Basil and I, we are really grateful for you sharing your thoughts with us in this process. We continue to really appreciate the support you've given us. We cannot take the time, like the Co-Chair has just said, that you continue to provide to us for granted. We know you are definitely having a lot at your desks, but to really give this time to us and to the process, we really appreciate that. We look forward to your effective participation in the peer review, which is now on. And I think let's continue with the spirit and until we are able to meet face to face. Thank you so much.
Sasha?
Thank you everyone for participating and for your continuous support. So again, we expect your very active participation and many submissions. So we definitely will see ourselves being busy working with your submissions. I like to remind again that all your submissions will be posted online. So you will see all of them on appropriate page. And again, as Basil also said, you may come to co-chairs with any questions, but also you definitely can come always to the secretariat if you need any further information or any clarifications. So we'll be happy to help and happy to work with you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much to everybody once again, all attendees for being here. I hope we achieve our goals for these seminars. Thank you to co-chairs for all this work, and the secretariat, and also Elizabeth Kim behind the scenes helping us with the presentation and the timekeeping. And I hope to see you next time in Substat face-to-face under better and safer conditions. Meanwhile, take care of yourself and maintain all of you healthy. And see you next time. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.